Hello everyone. Today, Biker Justice Analyst bring you a story full of humanity and compassion. Enjoy listening.
Hell's Angel was tricked into Christmas blind date. But what she did left him in tears. The neon sign of Joe's Diner flickered against the darkening sky as Maggie Reynolds untied her apron and hung it on the hook by the back door. Her shoulders ached from carrying heavy plates for the past 8 hours, but she managed a tired smile as she thought about getting home to Ethan. The thought of her son's warm hugs always made the long days worthwhile. "You sure you don't want to ride home, Maggie?" called Sarah, her co-worker, from behind the counter. "Weather's getting nasty out there." Maggie shook her head, pulling her worn jacket tighter around herself. "Thanks, but I'll be fine. It's just a few blocks, and you live in the opposite direction." The bell above the door chimed as she stepped outside, and immediately the cold autumn rain hit her face. The streetlights cast weak, yellow circles on the wet sidewalk, and the few people still out hurried past with umbrellas and hunched shoulders. Maggie hadn't brought an umbrella. The morning forecast hadn't mentioned rain. Before you continue listening, please let me know where in the world are you watching from today. Now back to the story. Her sensible shoes splashed through puddles as she walked, and she could feel water seeping into her socks. The chill crept under her jacket, making her shiver. The usual 15-minute walk home felt longer in the rain, each step accompanied by the sound of water dripping from awnings and car tires, swooshing through puddles. Maggie's mind wandered to her apartment, where Ethan would be doing homework under Mrs. Martinez's watchful eye. The kind neighbor had been watching him after school ever since Maggie had taken the evening shift. She thought about the leftover lasagna in the fridge and hoped Ethan had remembered to eat his vegetables. The street was quieter now as she turned onto Cedar Avenue, away from the main road. Here, the buildings stood closer together, their brick facades dark with rain. The streetlights were further apart, creating pools of shadow between them. Maggie quickened her pace, her wet hair clinging to her neck. A sudden gust of wind sent a newspaper skating across the sidewalk, and Maggie pulled her jacket even tighter. The fabric was soaked through now, and she could feel goosebumps rising on her arms. Just 3 more blocks, she told herself. 3 more blocks, and she'd be home. That's when she heard it, a sound that didn't belong with the rain and wind. A muffled groan, followed by what sounded like metal scraping against concrete. It came from the alley between Murphy's hardware store and the old bakery. Maggie stopped, her heart beating faster. Every instinct told her to keep walking, to hurry home to her son. She'd seen enough movies to know that investigating strange sounds in dark alleys rarely ended well. But there was something about that groan, something that sounded too real, too human to ignore. She stood there for a moment, rain running down her face, fighting an internal battle between caution and conscience. The sound came again, weaker this time, and before she could talk herself out of it, Maggie took a step toward the alley. "Hello?" she called out softly, her voice barely audible over the rain. "Is someone there?" The alley was dark, but as her eyes adjusted, she could make out shapes. A dumpster, some cardboard boxes, and something else, something that shouldn't have been there. A large form lay crumpled against the wall, barely moving. Maggie moved closer, her shoes crunching on broken glass. As she approached, details emerged from the shadows. The man was huge, his leather jacket covered in patches and rain. Tattoos snaked up his neck and onto his face, visible even in the dim light. But what caught her attention was the dark stain spreading across his stomach, too dark to be just rain. He was bleeding badly, one hand pressed weakly against the wound. His eyes were half closed, consciousness clearly slipping away. Despite his intimidating appearance, the tattoos, the leather, the obvious signs of gang affiliation, All Maggie could see in that moment was someone who desperately needed help. Maggie's heart pounded against her ribs as she took in the severity of the situation. The man's breathing was shallow, and the blood. There was so much blood. The rain kept falling, washing crimson streams into the nearby drain. Her hands trembled as she fumbled with her phone, almost dropping it on the wet pavement. "Sir, can you hear me?" Her voice shook, but she forced herself to stay calm. The stranger's eyes flickered, struggling to focus on her face. Up close, she could see the pain etched in his features, his jaw clenched tight against it. No one else was around. The street was deserted, the surrounding buildings dark and silent. The reality of being alone with a wounded gang member sent a chill through her that had nothing to do with the rain. But she couldn't leave him. She wouldn't. Without hesitation, Maggie unwound the blue scarf from her neck. The soft wool was already damp from the rain, but it would have to do. She bunched it up, preparing to use it as a makeshift pressure bandage. "I'm going to help you," she said more steadily this time. "But I need to put pressure on the wound. It's going to hurt." The man managed a slight nod, his breath coming in ragged gasps. Maggie pressed the scarf against his stomach, and he let out a grunt of pain that made her wince. But she held firm, knowing she had to keep the pressure steady. "My name is Maggie," she said, trying to keep him conscious through conversation. "What's yours?" "Ace," he managed to whisper, his voice rough and strained. With one hand maintaining pressure on the wound, Maggie used the other to dial 911. Her fingers left smears of blood on the phone's screen as she pressed the numbers. 911, what's your emergency?" The operator's voice seemed impossibly calm. "I need an ambulance," Maggie said, her words tumbling out. "I'm in the alley between Murphy's, Hardware, and the old bakery on Cedar Avenue. There's a man with a serious stomach wound. He's losing a lot of blood." The operator asked more questions. Was the victim conscious? Was he breathing? Was she safe? Maggie answered them all, her eyes never leaving Ace's face. His skin had gone frighteningly pale, and his eyelids kept drooping. "Hey," she said sharply, giving his shoulder a gentle shake. "Stay with me, Ace. Help is coming. You need to stay awake." His eyes opened again, focusing on her with effort. "Why?" he started to ask, but the words seemed to cost him too much energy. "Why am I helping you?" Maggie guessed, adjusting her grip on the now soaked scarf. "Because you need it. Simple as that." A ghost of a smile crossed his face, followed by a grimace of pain. "Thank you," he whispered, the words barely audible over the sound of the rain. Maggie could hear sirens in the distance now, getting closer. Her arms ached from maintaining pressure on the wound, and she was soaked to the bone. But she didn't move. She kept talking to Ace, asking him questions, telling him about the weather, anything to keep him conscious. The blue and red lights of the approaching ambulance began to flash against the wet brick walls of the alley, but she stayed focused on her task, on keeping this stranger alive until help arrived. Maggie sat in the fluorescent-lit lobby of the hospital, wringing the ends of her sleeves. The sterile smell of disinfectant hung in the air, blending with the quiet hums and beeps that seeped into the waiting room from the corridors beyond. Ace had been whisked away by paramedics the moment the ambulance arrived, leaving her dazed and soaked on the rain-slick pavement. "You did a good thing back there," a paramedic had told her, a slight, warm smile breaking the tension. "He wouldn't have made it to the hospital without you." Maggie offered a nod, still trying to grasp the gravity of her actions. She'd never met the hulking stranger before today, and hadn't realized until now how she'd barely hesitated in making a life-or-death decision. The adrenaline from the ordeal coursed just below the surface, keeping her heart thrumming even in the stillness of the waiting room. She glanced around, taking in other visitors with tired eyes and nervous hands, each wrapped in their own anticipation. The clock ticked on steadily, marking moments that felt interminable. Her mind floated back to that alley, Ace's pained gratitude as she helped him, the way his defenses seemed to crumble under life's fragility. "What have I gotten myself into?" she murmured, her voice lost in the ambient noise. 2 hours stretched into 3, the ticking clock her only companion as she replayed everything in her mind. The harsh reality of helping a man who belonged to something as ominous as the Hell's Angels began to take shape. She thought of Ethan, at home with Mrs. Taylor, who'd agreed to watch him when the call had come. Imagining his little face, so full of innocent worry, brought a fresh wave of anxiety. Finally, a doctor emerged through the double doors, scanning the room before approaching her. His expression was kind, but professional, a practiced empathy that suggested he'd delivered life-altering news too many times. "Miss Reynolds?" he began, consulting the clipboard in his hands. "Ace is stable now. He pulled through surgery but is still unconscious. It's too early to tell when he'll wake, but we're optimistic." Maggie exhaled, relief mixing with lingering tension. "Thank you. Do you need anything else from me? Leave a contact number with the nurses at reception, in case he asks for you when he wakes. We still have some bureaucratic hoops to jump through since we're sorting out his identity." "Identity?" she echoed, the word heavy with everything she didn't know about the man in the alley. The doctor nodded. "Yes, I believe more details will unfold once the police finalize their reports." Maggie gave her number to the nurse and left the hospital, the weight of the unknown settling over her like a second skin. The morning sun filtered through the diner's windows, casting long shadows across the checkerboard floor. Maggie tied her apron with practiced efficiency, but her movements felt mechanical, her mind still stuck in yesterday's rain-soaked alley. "Did you really save one of those bikers?" Tommy, a regular customer, leaned over his coffee cup, eyes wide with curiosity. "My cousin said he saw the ambulance and everything." Maggie managed a tight smile, filling his cup without spilling a drop. "I just helped someone who needed it, Tommy, that's all." But that wasn't all, not according to the whispers that followed her from table to table. The morning rush brought more than just hungry customers. It brought an endless stream of questions and concerned looks. Small towns had a way of turning news into legends overnight. "A Hell's Angel, right here in our town," Mrs. Peterson muttered to her friend at the counter, shooting furtive glances at Maggie. "What's the world coming to?" Behind the counter, Sarah, another waitress, nudged Maggie's arm. "You're either the bravest or the craziest person I know," she said, shaking her head. "Those guys are dangerous, Mags. Everyone knows about the Hell's Angels." Maggie focused on wiping down the counter, trying to ignore the mix of pride and unease churning in her stomach. She thought about the photo she'd seen falling from his jacket, the one of him with a young boy. That image kept surfacing in her mind, a reminder that even the most intimidating people had layers most never saw. "I heard he was covered in tattoos," someone whispered. "My brother said he had a knife," another added. "Thank goodness Maggie was there," a third voice chimed in. The gossip swirled around her like autumn leaves in a breeze, impossible to catch or control. Maggie kept working, pouring coffee, serving, plates, making change, all while carrying the weight of her decision and its implications. During a brief lull, she retreated to the break room, needing a moment of quiet. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, an unknown number lighting up the screen. Her heart skipped a beat as she answered. "Is this Maggie Reynolds?" a professional voice asked. "Yes, this is she." "I'm calling from County General Hospital. The patient you helped yesterday, Ace, is awake now. He's been asking to see you." Maggie's free hand gripped the edge of the break room table. "He's asking for me?" "Yes, ma'am. He was quite insistent, actually." The nurse paused. "Of course, you're under no obligation to come." Maggie closed her eyes, remembering the vulnerable look on Ace's face as she'd pressed her scarf against his wound. Despite everything she'd heard today, despite the warnings and worried glances, she couldn't forget that moment of raw humanity. "I'll come," she said finally, her voice steadier than she felt. "When would be a good time?" They arranged the details, and Maggie hung up, her thoughts a tangled mess of curiosity and apprehension. Outside the break room, she could still hear the murmur of conversations, still feel the weight of stares following her movements. But now, at least, she had a chance to learn the truth behind the whispers. Maggie paused outside room 314, her hand hovering over the door handle. Through the small window, she could see a large figure propped up against white hospital pillows. Taking a deep breath, she pushed the door open. The fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across Ace's face, making his features seem both sharper and more vulnerable than they had in the alley. His tattooed arms rested on top of the thin hospital blanket, and white bandages peeked out from beneath his hospital gown. A heart monitor beeped steadily beside him. "Hey," he said, his voice softer than she'd expected. "You're the angel from the alley." Maggie stepped closer, noticing how different he looked cleaned up. Without the rain and blood, she could see the exhaustion in his eyes, the slight tremor in his hands. "I'm Maggie," she replied, standing at the foot of his bed. "How are you feeling?" "Like I got stabbed," he said with a weak laugh that turned into a grimace. "But I'm alive, thanks to you." He gestured to the chair beside his bed. "Would you mind sitting for a minute? I'd like to properly thank you." Maggie hesitated, then took the offered seat. Up close, she could see the intricate details of his tattoos. Dragons, roses, and what looked like military insignias mixed with biker symbols. "The doctor said if you hadn't found me when you did..." He trailed off, his eyes meeting hers. "Most people would have walked right by. Probably should have, considering..." He gestured vaguely at himself. "I couldn't just leave you there," Maggie said simply. "Yeah, well, that makes you different from most folks." He shifted slightly, wincing at the movement. "I'm Ace, by the way, though you've probably heard all about me by now." The way he said it wasn't threatening or proud. If anything, there was a note of resignation in his voice. Maggie thought about all the whispered conversations at the diner. "I try not to listen to gossip," she replied. A genuine smile crossed his face, softening his features. "Smart woman?" He looked down at his hands, covered in faded tattoos. "Listen, I know what people must be saying, but I want you to know, what you did, stopping to help me, that meant something, more than I can say." There was a rawness to his words that caught Maggie off guard. This wasn't the hardened criminal everyone had been whispering about. This was just a man, hurt and grateful for an act of kindness. "Anyone would have done the same," she said. "No," he shook his head firmly. "They wouldn't have. Trust me on that." He seemed about to say more but grimaced again, pressing a hand to his side. "I should let you rest," Maggie said, standing up. "You need to heal." "Yeah, probably right," he agreed, though he looked disappointed. "Thanks for coming by, Maggie. Really." As she walked toward the door, something caught her eye. His leather jacket hung on a hook nearby, and tucked into the inner pocket, she could see the edge of a photograph. It was the same one she'd glimpsed in the alley. A snapshot of Ace standing next to a young boy, both of them smiling at the camera. The boy looked about Ethan's age, and there was no mistaking the pride and love in Ace's expression as he stood with his arm around the child's shoulders. The image stuck with her as she left the room, adding another layer to the complex puzzle of the man she'd saved. The next morning, Maggie stood outside apartment 2B, clutching a plastic bag filled with the clothes Ace had requested. The building was worn down, with peeling paint and a broken security door that squeaked on its hinges. She took a deep breath and knocked. "It's open," Ace's voice called from inside. Maggie pushed the door, which creaked loudly. The apartment was small and dimly lit, with just a few pieces of basic furniture. A twin mattress lay in one corner, no bed frame. The walls were bare, except for a few motorcycle posters, and that same photo she'd seen at the hospital. Ace with the young boy. Empty takeout containers littered a small folding table, and a leather vest with the Hell's Angels patch hung on a hook by the door. The place felt temporary, like someone who never planned to stay long enough to make it a home. "Sorry about the mess," Ace said from his position on a worn recliner. He was wearing sweatpants and a plain white t-shirt that showed off his tattoo-covered arms. His face was pale, and he moved gingerly when he tried to sit up straighter. "I'd clean up, but..." He gestured to his bandaged midsection. "Don't worry about it," Maggie said, though she couldn't help but notice how the space felt hollow, almost sad. "I brought what you asked for." She held up the bag. "You're a lifesaver." Again. He attempted a smile, but it came out more like a grimace. "Would you mind putting them in that drawer over there?" He pointed to a scratched-up dresser. As Maggie crossed the room, she noticed more details: a military duffel bag in the corner, some tools scattered on a small workbench, and a few dirty dishes in the tiny kitchenette. No photos except the one on the wall, no personal touches that would make this place feel like anyone's home. "I know it ain't much," Ace said quietly, as if reading her thoughts. "Never been good at the whole domestic thing." He shifted in his chair, wincing. "Usually crash at different places, but been trying to stay put lately. For Zach's sake." His eyes drifted to the photo. "Is that your son?" Maggie asked, though she already knew the answer. "Yeah." His voice softened. "Haven't seen him in a while, though. His mom..." He trailed off, then shook his head. "Well, let's just say I haven't given them many reasons to trust me." The vulnerability in his voice made Maggie pause. She thought about her own son, Ethan, and how lonely life would be without him. "Listen," Ace continued, "I really appreciate you doing this. I know you probably got better things to do than help out some beat-up biker. Don't got many people I can call, you know?" Something in his tone, the raw honesty of it, touched something in Maggie's heart. Looking around the sparse apartment again, she saw beyond the mess and the rough exterior. She saw someone who was alone, trying to change, maybe, but not knowing how. "It's no trouble," she said softly, and meant it. The tough, intimidating man from the alley seemed far away now, replaced by someone who just needed a little kindness. Ace nodded, unable to meet her eyes, and Maggie realized that maybe this simple act of bringing him clothes meant more than she'd thought. Sometimes the smallest gestures could make the biggest difference to someone who had no one else to turn to. Maggie stirred the pot of mac and cheese on the stove, while Ethan sat at their small kitchen table, working on his math homework. The familiar sounds of pencil scratching paper and bubbling cheese sauce filled their cozy apartment. She glanced at her son, his brow furrowed in concentration, and wondered how to explain the events of the past few days. "Hey, sweetie," she said, keeping her voice casual. "Remember when Mommy had to stay late at the hospital the other night?" Ethan looked up from his textbook. "Yeah. Mrs. Jenkins from next door stayed with me. She made weird-tasting cookies." Maggie smiled, turning down the heat under the pot. Well, I wanted to tell you about the person I helped that night. She spooned the mac and cheese into 2 bowls, adding extra cheese to Ethan's portion just the way he liked it. I found someone who was hurt, and I helped him get to the hospital. Was he really sick? Ethan asked, pushing his homework aside as Maggie set the bowls on the table. He was injured, Maggie explained carefully, sitting down across from him. But the doctors fixed him up. His name is Ace, and I've been helping him a little while he gets better. Ethan poked at his dinner with his fork. Is he dangerous? His voice was quiet, but his eyes showed concern beyond his 8 years. No, honey. Maggie reached across the table and squeezed his hand. He might look a little scary on the outside, but he's actually quite nice. He even has a son, just like I have you. Really? Ethan's expression brightened slightly. How old is his son? He's older than you now, but in the picture I saw, he looked about your age. Maggie watched as Ethan processed this information. Sometimes people just need a little help, even grown-ups. Like when Tommy fell at recess, and I helped him up? Ethan asked, referring to an incident from the previous week. Exactly like that. Maggie smiled, relieved at his understanding. It's important to help others when we can. Their conversation was interrupted by the sharp ring of Maggie's phone. Ryan's name flashed on the screen. Hi, Ryan, she answered, mouthing to Ethan that it was his dad. Just checking in on the little man, Ryan said. How's he doing? He's good. Just having dinner and finishing up his math homework. Maggie watched as Ethan returned to his mac and cheese. Do you want to talk to him? In a minute. How are you doing? I heard some interesting rumors about you helping some biker the other night. Maggie's stomach tightened. News travels fast in this town, she said, trying to keep her voice light. Yes, I helped someone named Ace. He was hurt pretty badly. Ace? Ryan's voice sharpened. The Hell's Angel? Maggie, what are you thinking? That man is dangerous. I've heard stories about him and his gang. He needed help, Ryan. I couldn't just... You need to stay away from him. Ryan cut her off. These people are violent criminals. What if Ethan gets caught up in something? Have you even thought about that? Maggie felt her cheeks flush with guilt. She looked at Ethan, innocently eating his dinner, and her throat tightened. It's not like that, she said quietly. He's trying to change. People like that don't change, Maggie. They just drag others down with them. Ryan's voice was stern. I'm serious. Stay away from him. The morning sun streamed through the diner's windows as Maggie wiped down the counter. She glanced up at the clock, almost time for Ace's usual visit. Over the past 2 weeks, he'd become a regular, always choosing the same corner booth where he could keep an eye on both entrances. The bell above the door chimed, and Ace's massive frame filled the doorway. Despite his intimidating appearance, Maggie had noticed how he tried to make himself smaller, less threatening when he came in. He nodded at her and headed to his usual spot. The usual? Maggie asked, already reaching for the coffee pot. Thanks. His voice was gruff but gentle, as she poured his coffee. She noticed his hands, strong and calloused, but trembling slightly. You okay? She asked, setting down the pot. Need anything from the store later? I'm heading there after my shift. Ace looked up, surprise flickering across his weathered face. You don't have to do that. I know, Maggie said, shrugging, but I'm going anyway. Later that afternoon, Maggie found herself at Ace's apartment, grocery bags in hand. The place was cleaner than her first visit, though still sparse. A few tools were scattered on the kitchen counter. He'd mentioned something about fixing appliances for extra cash. Let me help with those, Ace said, taking the bags. His movements were careful, his stomach wound, still healing. You didn't have to get all this. It's nothing, Maggie replied, watching as he put away the groceries. Her eyes caught on a photo taped to his refrigerator, the same one she'd seen before of him and his son. How old is he now? Ace's hands stilled. 17, he said quietly. Haven't seen him in 5 years, though. He turned, leaning against the counter. His mom got full custody when he was 10. Can't blame her, really. What kind of life could I give him? Running with the angels? Maggie sat at the small kitchen table, sensing Ace needed to talk. He remained standing, his fingers tracing patterns on the countertop. I never wanted this life, he continued, his voice rough with emotion. Started after my tour in Afghanistan. Couldn't adjust to civilian life. The angels, they gave me purpose, brotherhood. Didn't realize until too late what I was trading for it. Have you tried reaching out to him? Maggie asked gently. Ace shook his head. Wrote letters, called. His mom always said the same thing. He doesn't want to talk to me. Can't blame the kid. Last time he saw me, I was being hauled away in handcuffs. The pain in his voice was raw, real. Maggie thought about Ethan, how devastating it would be to lose him. I've made so many mistakes, Ace said, finally sitting down across from her. The things I've done, but nothing hurts like losing my boy. He used to look at me like I was his hero. He let out a bitter laugh. Now he probably thinks I'm a monster. Maggie watched as this imposing man seemed to crumple in on himself, the weight of his regrets visible in the slump of his shoulders. Despite her lingering caution, her heart ached for him. She reached across the table and squeezed his hand briefly. It's never too late to change, she said softly, to try to make things right. Ace looked at her hand on his, then met her eyes. The vulnerability there made him seem more human than ever. Sometimes I wonder if I deserve the chance. The evening sun cast long shadows through Ace's apartment windows as Maggie dropped off some leftover pie from the diner. She'd noticed he rarely ate properly, and motherly instinct had kicked in despite her better judgment. As she set the container on his kitchen counter, something caught her eye, a small frame partially hidden behind a stack of mail. Curious, she moved closer. The photograph showed a younger boy, maybe 12 or 13, with Ace's strong jawline and dark eyes. But where Ace's eyes usually held a guarded wariness, the boy's sparkled with joy. In the photo, he wore a baseball uniform and clutched a trophy, beaming at the camera. That's Zach. Ace's voice came from behind her, making her jump slightly. She hadn't heard him approach. Sorry, didn't mean to startle you. He looks just like you, Maggie said softly, watching as Ace picked up the frame with gentle hands that seemed at odds with his rough appearance. Yeah, poor kid got stuck with my ugly mug. He attempted a joke, but his voice cracked slightly. His fingers traced the edge of the frame, and Maggie noticed how his shoulders slumped, the usual tension in his stance replaced by something heavier. Grief. When was this taken? She asked, pulling out one of his kitchen chairs and sitting down. After a moment's hesitation, Ace joined her at the table, still holding the photo. Little League Championships. He was 13. Ace's thumb brushed across the glass. His team won. I actually made it to that game, one of the few times I showed up when I said I would. The regret in his voice was palpable. Maggie waited, sensing there was more to come. He used to beg me to come to his games, Ace continued, his voice rough. But I always had club business to handle. The Angels came first, always did. What kind of father puts a gang before his own kid? He set the frame down carefully on the table between them. Last time I tried calling him was 6 months ago. His mom answered, same as always. Said he doesn't want to talk to me. Can't blame him. What kind of role model was I? Missing his games, showing up with different women, getting into fights? Maggie watched as Ace ran a hand over his face, trying to hide the moisture in his eyes. The tough exterior he usually maintained was cracking, revealing the deep pain underneath. "You know what kills me?" he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I remember the way he used to look at me when he was little, like I was his hero, like I could do no wrong. Now he won't even take my calls." Without thinking, Maggie reached across the table and placed her hand over his. "Have you tried writing to him?" Ace nodded. "Letters, emails, even tried sending messages through his mom. Nothing." "Maybe." Maggie paused, choosing her words carefully. "Maybe he needs to see that you've changed. Not just hear about it, but really see it. Actions speak louder than words, especially with teenagers." Ace looked up at her, a mix of hope and uncertainty in his eyes. "How do I show him when he won't even give me a chance?" "Start small," Maggie suggested. "Send him regular letters, even if he doesn't respond. Tell him about the changes you're making, the work you're doing. Be consistent. Show him you're not the same person who used to disappoint him, and most importantly, be patient. Trust takes time to rebuild." The bell above the diner's door chimed as Maggie locked up for the night. Behind her, Ace was already rolling up his sleeves, his toolbox sitting on the counter. The flickering light above the coffee machine had been driving her crazy for weeks, and Ace had offered to take a look. "You really don't have to do this," Maggie said, though she was grateful for the help. The owner had been putting off repairs, saying they couldn't afford a handyman. "It's the least I can do," Ace replied, pulling over a stepladder. "Besides, that flickering would give anyone a headache." As Ace worked on the light fixture, Maggie wiped down the tables, stealing glances at him. His large hands, usually so intimidating, moved with surprising delicacy as he worked with the wiring. The tattoos on his arms shifted as his muscles flexed, telling stories she wasn't sure she wanted to know. The next evening, Ace was back, this time fixing the wobbly legs on 3 different chairs. Mrs. Peterson, one of the regular customers, watched him through the window with narrow eyes as she passed by. But old Joe, who came in every morning for his black coffee and wheat toast, actually gave Ace a nod of approval. "Good to see someone taking care of our girl's place," Joe said one morning, loud enough for everyone to hear. Ace just ducked his head and continued working, but Maggie noticed the slight smile on his face. By the end of the week, Ace had become a familiar sight at the diner after closing. He fixed the temperamental dishwasher, replaced the rusty paper towel dispenser in the bathroom, and even managed to get the ancient jukebox working again. Some of the regulars started to warm up to him, especially after he helped Mrs. Wilson jumpstart her car in the parking lot. But not everyone was convinced. A group of businessmen who usually came in for lunch started choosing tables far from where Ace worked. Sarah, the morning waitress, always made sure to leave before he arrived. One particularly busy evening, as Maggie was counting the till and Ace was installing new hinges on the kitchen door, the bell chimed. Sheriff Cooper walked in, his presence immediately filling the small diner. Ace's shoulders tensed, but he continued working, though Maggie noticed his movements had become more mechanical. "Evening, Maggie," the sheriff said, settling onto a stool at the counter. His eyes flickered to Ace before returning to her. "Got a minute?" Maggie nodded, trying to keep her hand steady as she finished with the register. "What can I help you with, Sheriff?" "Been hearing about your new handyman," he said, keeping his voice low. "Thought we should have a chat about that." The sheriff glanced over his shoulder at Ace, who was very deliberately focused on the door hinges. "You know who he is, right? What he's been involved with?" "He's been helping around the diner," Maggie said defensively, but her voice wavered slightly. "Maggie," Sheriff Cooper leaned forward, his expression concerned. "This man has a file thicker than my arm. Assault charges, suspected weapons trafficking, known associations with one of the most dangerous motorcycle gangs in the country." He paused, letting the words sink in. I know you like to see the good in people, but some folks don't change. They just get better at hiding who they really are. Maggie's eyes drifted to Ace, who was now gathering his tools, his movements sharp and angry. She thought about all the small kindnesses she'd witnessed over the past week, the gentle way he handled repairs, his patience with difficult customers, the genuine smile when he got something working again. The sheriff stood up, adjusting his belt. Just be careful, Maggie. Some people are beyond helping, and trying to save them only puts you in danger. He tipped his hat and walked out, leaving Maggie standing behind the counter, her mind a whirlwind of doubt and confusion. The morning sun filtered through the diner's windows as Maggie refilled coffee cups. Her muscles ached from yesterday's double shift, but she kept a smile on her face. The bell above the door chimed, and her smile froze. Ryan stood in the doorway, his business suit crisp and his expression stern. "We need to talk," he said, sliding onto a counter stool. His cologne, too expensive for the modest diner, made her nose wrinkle. Maggie glanced at her other customers, then nodded to Sarah to cover her section. She led Ryan to a corner booth, away from curious ears. "What brings you here?" "I heard about your new friend." Ryan's voice was controlled, but she could hear the anger underneath. "The whole town's talking about how you're letting a Hell's Angel hang around." "He's not just—" Maggie started, but Ryan cut her off. "Do you have any idea how dangerous these people are?" He leaned forward, lowering his voice. "These aren't just tough guys on motorcycles, Maggie. They're criminals, drug runners, worse." Maggie's hands tightened around her coffee pot. "Ace is trying to change." Ryan let out a harsh laugh. "Change? People like that don't change. They manipulate. They use people." He pulled out his phone, sliding it across the table. "Look at this." On the screen was a news article from 3 years ago. The headline read, "Hell's Angels member connected to interstate drug ring." Maggie's stomach churned as she saw Ace's mugshot. "That's who you're letting near our son," Ryan said. "What happens when his gang buddies show up? When they decide to settle old scores?" "He's not like that anymore," Maggie insisted, but doubt crept into her voice. "Really?" Ryan's eyes narrowed. "Because I called some friends in law enforcement. His record includes assault, suspected weapons trafficking, and connections to organized crime. Is that who you want around Ethan?" The mention of their son made Maggie's chest tighten. She thought of Ethan's innocent smile, his trust in her, judgment. "I'm his father," Ryan continued, his tone softening slightly. "It's my job to protect him, and right now you're putting him at risk." Before Maggie could respond, her phone buzzed. The hospital's number flashed on the screen. Her heart skipped a beat as she answered. "Ms. Reynolds," a nurse's voice came through. "I'm calling about Mr. Davidson, Ace. His wound is showing signs of infection, his fever's spiking, and we're having trouble stabilizing him." Maggie's hand trembled as she held the phone. Ryan's words echoed in her mind, about danger, about Ethan, about protection, but all she could think about was Ace lying in that hospital bed, alone. "He's been asking for you," the nurse added softly. Ryan watched her face, reading her expression. "Don't tell me you're thinking of going to him." Maggie stood up, gathering her things. "Sarah can cover my shift," she said, more to herself than to Ryan. "Maggie," Ryan called after her, his voice hard. "If you do this, if you keep letting him into your life, we're going to have to discuss Ethan's custody arrangement." She paused at the threat, her heart pounding. But the image of Ace, vulnerable and alone in that hospital room, wouldn't leave her mind. Without looking back at Ryan, she headed for the door, her steps quick and determined. The stairs to Ace's second-floor apartment creaked under Maggie's feet as she climbed them slowly. Her conversation with Ryan still echoed in her mind, but concern for Ace pushed those thoughts aside. When she reached his door, she noticed it was slightly ajar. "Ace?" she called out, pushing it open carefully. The apartment was dark, except for a single lamp casting shadows across the worn furniture. Ace sat hunched over on his couch, his massive frame looking somehow smaller than usual. His face was pale, and sweat beaded on his forehead. "You shouldn't have come," he said, his voice rough. Maggie stepped inside, closing the door behind her. "The hospital called. They said you left against medical advice." She moved closer, noting how he cradled his side. "You're supposed to be resting." "Couldn't stay there." Ace shifted, wincing. "They found me." A chill ran down Maggie's spine. "The gang?" Ace nodded, his eyes fixed on the floor. "Two of them showed up at the hospital, said it was time for me to come back." His hands trembled slightly as he wiped his face. "They're not asking anymore." Maggie sat down in the armchair across from him, her heart racing. "What are they threatening?" "Everything." Ace looked up at her, his eyes haunted. "They know about you, about the diner. They know I've been changing." He swallowed hard. "They don't like change." "Are you afraid?" Maggie asked softly. Ace's laugh was bitter. "Never used to be. Fear wasn't allowed." He ran a hand through his hair. "But now? Yeah, I'm scared. Not just for me. For you, for Ethan. For my own kid who won't even talk to me." Maggie leaned forward, her voice firm despite her own fear. "Then you need to make a choice, Ace. Right now." "It's not that simple." "Yes, it is," Maggie interrupted. "You can go back to them, back to that life, or you can choose something different." She gestured around the sparse apartment. "This isn't living, Ace. This is hiding. From them, from yourself, from everything you could be." Ace's jaw clenched. "You don't understand what they're capable of." "Maybe not," Maggie admitted. "But I understand what you're capable of. I've seen it. The man who helps fix things at the diner, who talks about his son with so much love, that's who you really are." She stood up and walked over to him, kneeling beside the couch. "I can help you start over. Find a real job, make amends with your son, build a life you're proud of. But only if you're ready to leave all of this behind. Really leave it." Ace's eyes met hers, and she saw the conflict there, the fear wrestling with hope. His breathing was shallow, and she could tell his wound was causing him pain. But something else was breaking through. Determination. "I want to," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "God help me, I want to try." He reached out and took her hand, his grip gentle despite his size. "But I don't know how." "Then let me help you," Maggie said, squeezing his hand. "We'll figure it out together." Ace nodded slowly, straightening up despite the pain. "Okay," he said. "I promise. I'll try." The afternoon sun streamed through the diner's windows, creating long shadows across the checkered floor. Maggie wiped down the counter, humming softly to herself as the lunch rush wound down. Only a few regulars remained, nursing their coffee cups. The bell above the door chimed. 3 men walked in, their heavy boots thudding against the linoleum. Maggie's breath caught in her throat. Their leather vests bore the unmistakable Hell's Angels patches, and their faces were hard as stone. "Welcome to Sally's Diner," she managed to say, her voice steadier than she felt. "What can I get you?" The tallest one, a man with a thick gray beard and cold eyes, leaned against the counter. "You're Maggie Reynolds?" It wasn't a question. She gripped her dish rag tighter. "Yes." "We need to have a chat about our friend Ace." He glanced at the other customers. "Somewhere private." "I'm working," Maggie said. "Whatever you need to say, you can say it here." The second man, younger with tattoos crawling up his neck, moved closer. You've been filling his head with ideas, making him soft. His voice was quiet, but menacing. That stops now. Ace makes his own choices, Maggie replied, though her heart hammered in her chest. The bearded man's smile didn't reach his eyes. See, that's where you're wrong. Ace belongs with us. He took an oath. He placed his hands on the counter, leaning in. And you're getting in the way of that. Mrs. Henderson, one of the regulars, stood up from her booth. Everything all right, Maggie? Stay out of this, lady, the third biker growled. It's fine, Mrs. Henderson, Maggie said quickly. Please, just go. The elderly woman hesitated, but gathered her purse and left, along with the other customers who sensed the tension. Once they were alone, the bearded man continued. Here's how this works. You stay away from Ace or things get ugly. He pulled out his wallet and dropped a 50 on the counter. For the coffee we didn't drink. He doesn't want that life anymore, Maggie said, her voice shaking slightly. The man with the neck tattoos laughed. What he wants doesn't matter. Once you're in for life. He knocked over a stack of menus. And anyone who gets between us and our brothers. He let the threat hang in the air. They turned to leave, but the bearded man paused at the door. We're watching you, Maggie Reynolds. You, and that little boy of yours. His eyes were cold. Don't make us come back. The bell chimed again as they left. Maggie's legs gave out, and she gripped the counter to stay upright. Her hands trembled as she picked up the scattered menus. Hours later, after closing, Maggie heard a soft knock at the back door. She knew it was Ace before she opened it. He stood there, looking more defeated than she'd ever seen him. His broad shoulders were slumped, and his eyes were filled with anguish. They came to see you. Maggie nodded, letting him in. I'm so sorry, he said, running a hand over his face. I should have known they'd do this. He paced the kitchen floor. They won't let me walk away, Maggie, and now they're threatening you. What are you going to do? She asked quietly. Ace stopped pacing, his expression torn. They're serious about coming after you if I don't go back. They'll hurt you, or worse. His voice cracked. And if anything happened to you or Ethan because of me. Maggie stepped closer to him. So you're giving up? I don't know what else to do, he whispered, the conflict clear on his face. These people, they don't make idle threats. They'll destroy everything I care about. The evening air was crisp as Maggie sat on a wooden bench in Jefferson Park, watching children play on the swings. Her hands were wrapped around a paper cup of coffee, more for comfort than warmth. She checked her watch again, her stomach tight with worry. Ace appeared from behind the old oak tree, his massive frame casting a long shadow in the setting sun. He looked around carefully before sitting next to her, leaving enough space between them to not draw attention. Thanks for meeting me here, he said quietly, his eyes scanning the playground. I needed to talk to you away from, well, from everyone. Maggie nodded, noticing how tired he looked. The usual confidence in his posture was gone, replaced by a weary slump in his shoulders. Are you okay? After yesterday? No, he admitted, rubbing his face with both hands. I'm not okay. Nothing about this is okay. He turned to face her, his expression serious. I'm going to cut ties with them. Maggie, all of them. But I need you to understand something. She waited, watching his internal struggle play across his face. Even if I leave, he continued, his voice low and rough, I can't guarantee they won't come after you, or Ethan. He clenched his fists in his lap. These guys, they hold grudges. They don't forget. And they sure as hell don't forgive. A child's laughter rang out from the playground, the sound jarring against their serious conversation. Maggie wrapped her arms around herself, feeling suddenly cold despite her jacket. "What are you saying, exactly?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. Ace shifted on the bench, his leather jacket creaking. "I'm saying that helping me, being around me, it puts you in danger. Real danger." He looked at her, his eyes full of pain. "And I can't live with that." "So you're just going to give up?" Maggie's voice cracked slightly. "After everything? Give up?" Ace shook his head. "No, I'm going to fight. But I need to do it my way, without putting you and Ethan at risk." A group of pigeons landed nearby, pecking at scattered breadcrumbs. Maggie watched them, trying to sort through her emotions. The thought of Ace facing the gang alone made her chest ache, but the memory of their threats against Ethan sent chills down her spine. "I don't know what to do," she whispered, more to herself than to him. Ace reached out as if to touch her hand, but stopped himself. "You've already done more than anyone else ever has, Maggie. You showed me there's another way to live." His voice was thick with emotion. "But I won't let my past destroy your future." Maggie felt tears threatening to fall. She blinked them back, remembering the cold eyes of the men in the diner, their threats still ringing in her ears. But she also remembered Ace's vulnerability, his genuine desire to change, the way he looked at his son's photo with such longing. "What if—" she started, then stopped, uncertain how to continue. "What if what?" "What if helping you is worth the risk?" She met his gaze steadily, despite her fear. "What if turning our backs on someone who needs help is worse than facing danger?" Ace stared at her, clearly torn between his desire to protect her and his need for her support. The weight of the decision hung between them, heavy as the gathering dusk. Maggie stepped out of her apartment building early the next morning, keys jingling in her hand. The sun hadn't fully risen yet, and a light mist clung to the ground. She needed to get Ethan to school before her morning shift at the diner. She stopped dead in her tracks. Her old Toyota's windows were shattered, glass scattered across the pavement like diamonds in the dim light. Deep scratches ran along the sides of the car, and the tires were slashed. Her hands trembled as she approached the vehicle, heart pounding in her chest. A piece of paper fluttered under one of the wipers. With shaking fingers, she pulled it free. The message was crude, written in thick black marker. "Stay away from Ace or else." "Mom?" Ethan's voice came from behind her. "What happened to our car?" Maggie quickly crumpled the note and shoved it in her pocket. "Go back inside, honey. I need to make a phone call." Once Ethan was safely back in the apartment, she pulled out her phone and dialed Ace. Her fingers were trembling so badly she had to try twice. "Hello?" His voice was groggy with sleep. "They destroyed my car," she whispered, tears finally breaking free. "There was a note." "I'll be there in 10 minutes, he said, suddenly alert. "Don't touch anything. I'm calling the police." True to his word, Ace's motorcycle roared up to her building minutes later. He took one look at her car, and his face darkened with rage. His fists clenched at his sides as he circled the vehicle, taking in the damage. "This ends today," he growled. "I'm done letting them threaten you." "Ace, don't." Maggie reached for his arm, but he was already striding toward his bike. "Stay here," he ordered. "The police are on their way. I'm going to handle this." Before she could stop him, he kicked his motorcycle to life and roared away. Maggie stood there, heart racing, as police sirens wailed in the distance. Across town, Ace pulled up to the Broken Spoke, a dingy bar where he knew the gang would be gathering for their morning meeting. He pushed through the door, ignoring the startled looks from the few early patrons. 6 members of the Hells Angels sat around their usual table, including Snake, their leader. They looked up as Ace approached, their expressions a mix of amusement and contempt. "Well, look who decided to come crawling back," Snake sneered, taking a long pull from his beer. "I'm not crawling anywhere," Ace said, his voice deadly calm. "I'm here to tell you it's over. I'm done with the gang, and you're going to leave Maggie alone." Snake's smile disappeared. "That's not how this works, brother. You know that." "I'm not your brother," Ace spat. "And if anything happens to Maggie or her kid, if you so much as look at them wrong, I'll make sure everyone in this town knows about your operation. Every dirty deal, every crooked cop on your payroll." The other gang members stood up, chairs scraping against the floor. Snake's face had turned an ugly shade of red. "You threatening us?" he growled. "No," Ace said. "I'm promising you. Leave them alone, or I'll burn everything you've built to the ground. I've got nothing left to lose." Snake studied him for a long moment, then laughed, an ugly, harsh sound. "You've gone soft, Ace. That woman's made you weak." He stood up slowly. "Fine. Walk away. But don't think this is over. Not by a long shot." Ace turned and walked out of the bar, his heart hammering in his chest. He knew his threat would only buy them time, but it was all he could do for now. The gang wouldn't let this go easily, but he had to try. For Maggie's sake. Maggie wiped down the diner's counter for the third time, more out of nervous habit than necessity. The morning rush had ended, leaving only a few regulars nursing their coffee cups. Ace sat at the far end, his massive frame hunched over a plate of eggs and toast. She couldn't help but smile at how different he looked now. His leather jacket was gone, replaced by a plain work shirt. The hard lines around his mouth had softened, though dark circles under his eyes betrayed his worry. "More coffee?" she asked, already reaching for the pot. "Thanks." He wrapped his hands around the warm mug. "You know, you don't have to keep checking on me every 5 minutes. I'm not going anywhere." "I know." Maggie leaned against the counter. I worry about you." "Should be the other way around," he muttered, but there was warmth in his voice. The bell above the door chimed, and Ethan burst in, backpack bouncing. "Mom, I got an A on my science project." Maggie's face lit up. "That's wonderful, honey." Ace shifted in his seat, watching the exchange with a mixture of pride and sadness. Ethan had slowly warmed up to him over the past few weeks, even asking for help with his homework sometimes. "Hey, kid," Ace said. "Want to see something cool?" He pulled out his phone and showed Ethan a video of a science experiment he'd found online. Ethan's eyes widened. "Can we try that at home, Mom?" "As long as nothing explodes," Maggie laughed, ruffling her son's hair. The afternoon passed peacefully. Ace fixed a wobbly table in the corner while Maggie worked her shift. They fell into an easy rhythm, almost like a normal family. Almost. Later, as the sun began to set, Ace was helping Maggie close up the diner when the bell chimed again. A young man stood in the doorway, tall and lean, with familiar features that made Maggie's heart skip. Ace froze, dish towel still in his hands. "Zach?" His son stepped inside, jaw clenched tight. He looked around the diner, taking in the scene, his father in an apron, helping clean up. "This is new," Zach said, his voice carefully controlled. Ace set down the towel. "What are you doing here?" "Heard you got shot." Zach's hands were shoved deep in his pockets. "Then I heard you were leaving the Angels. Figured I should see for myself if it was true." Maggie touched Ace's arm. "I'll give you two some privacy." "No," both men said at the same time. "You can stay," Zach added, surprising them all. "I've heard about you too, the woman who saved my dad." Ace took a step toward his son. "Zach, I know I've messed up. More times than I can count." "Yeah, you have." Zach's voice cracked slightly. "But maybe that's not all you are." He looked at Maggie, then back at his father. Maybe there's more to the story. The tension in Ace's shoulders eased slightly. There is, if you want to hear it. Zach nodded, almost imperceptibly. His eyes were bright with unshed tears, but there was something else there too. A tiny spark of hope, fragile as a candle flame in the wind. Yeah, he said, softly. I think I do. Maggie brought over 2 steaming cups of coffee and set them on the table where Ace and Zach sat across from each other. The diner was empty now. The closed sign turned to face the darkening street outside. I'll be in the kitchen if you need anything, she said softly, touching Ace's shoulder before stepping away. The silence stretched between father and son, broken only by the gentle hum of the refrigerator and the ticking of the wall clock. Ace wrapped his hands around his coffee cup, his knuckles white with tension. You look different, Zach finally said, studying his father's face. No leather jacket, no gang colors. Been trying to change, Ace replied, his voice rough with emotion. Zach's jaw tightened. Bit late for that, isn't it? He stared into his coffee. Do you know how many birthdays you missed? How many times I waited for you to show up? Ace flinched as if struck. I know. No, I don't think you do. Zach's voice rose slightly. Mom used to make excuses for you. Said you were working. Said you'd come next time. But I knew better. I saw the news reports about the Angels, about the fights, the arrests. His hands trembled as he pushed his coffee away. I used to pray you weren't involved, but deep down, I knew. I was stupid, Ace admitted, his eyes fixed on his son's face. I thought I was building something important, something bigger than myself, but all I did was destroy what mattered most. You chose them over us, Zach said, his voice cracking. Over me. Do you know what it's like, having other kids ask about your dad, and knowing he's out there somewhere choosing a gang over his own son? Tears welled in Ace's eyes. I don't deserve your forgiveness, Zach. What I did... There's no excuse. I was a coward. I told myself I was being strong, being tough, but I was just running away from what scared me most, being a real father. And now, Zach challenged. What's different now? Now? Ace looked around the diner, then back at his son. Now I know what I lost, what I threw away. Meeting Maggie, seeing how she is with her boy, it showed me what real strength looks like. It's not about being tough or feared. It's about being there, being honest, being brave enough to face your mistakes. Zach's shoulders sagged slightly. Pretty words, Dad. But how do I know they're real? You don't, Ace said simply. I can't prove it with just words. I can only show you day by day if you'll let me try. He paused, swallowing hard. I'm sorry, son. More sorry than I can ever say. For every birthday, every school event, every moment I should have been there and wasn't. For choosing that life over you. For being too weak to be the father you deserved. Zach was quiet for a long moment, his eyes glistening. Finally he stood up, pushing his chair back. I need time, he said. It's a lot to process. Ace nodded, trying to hide his disappointment. I understand. But, Zach added, hesitating by the table, maybe we can talk again. Sometimes. I'm not making any promises, but I'll think about it. That's more than I deserve, Ace said quietly. Thank you. Zach reached into his pocket and pulled out a business card. He placed it on the table, his hand lingering for a moment. My number, he explained. If you want to, you know. The sharp rap at Maggie's door made her jump. She knew that knock, 3 quick beats, aggressive and demanding. Her hands trembled as she peeked through the curtains. 4 men in leather jackets stood outside, their motorcycles parked haphazardly across her small front lawn. Ethan was at his father's house for the weekend, thank goodness. But that small relief did little to calm her racing heart. "Open up, sweetheart," a gruff voice called. "We just want to talk." Maggie backed away from the window, fumbling for her phone. Before she could dial, she heard the familiar rumble of Ace's truck pulling into the driveway. Her chest tightened as she watched him step out, his face hard and determined. "What are you doing here?" Ace's voice carried through the thin walls. He positioned himself between the gang members and her front door. Snake, the gang's leader, stepped forward. His leather vest was adorned with patches that told stories of violence. "Come on, brother. You know why we're here. You're one of us. Always will be." "Not anymore," Ace said firmly, planting his feet wider. "I told you, I'm done." "Nobody leaves the Angels," another member growled. "You know the rules." Maggie crept closer to the window, her heart pounding so hard she could barely hear their words. Ace stood tall, but she could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his hands curled into fists at his sides. "Rules change," Ace replied. "I'm changing, and if you can't accept that, then we have a problem." Snake laughed, but there was no humor in it. "A problem?" "Yeah, you could say that. See, you're making us look weak. People start thinking they can just walk away whenever they want. That's bad for business." "I don't care about your business anymore," Ace's voice grew harder. "I care about my son, about building something real." "What, with that waitress?" Snake sneered, gesturing toward the house. "Playing house with her and her kid? That's not you, brother. You're fooling yourself." Maggie watched as Ace took a step forward, his presence suddenly filling the space between them. Even outnumbered, he radiated a quiet strength she'd never seen before. "Listen carefully," Ace said, his voice low and dangerous. "I'm not your brother anymore. And if anything happens to Maggie or her boy, if they so much as get a scratch, you'll see exactly what kind of man I really am. Are we clear?" The tension crackled in the air. Snake's face darkened, but something in Ace's stance made him hesitate. "This isn't over," Snake finally said, backing up a step. "The Angels don't forget, and they don't forgive." "Neither do I," Ace replied steadily. The gang members mounted their bikes, engines roaring to life in the quiet neighborhood. Snake pointed 2 fingers at his eyes, then at Ace, a silent promise of watching, waiting. As they rode away, Maggie's legs gave out. She sank to the floor beneath the window, her whole body shaking. The threats weren't empty. She knew that. The danger was real, and it wouldn't go away just because Ace stood up to them. But as she looked out at Ace, still standing guard in her driveway, his face set with determination, she felt something else alongside the fear. A steely resolve began to form in her chest. These men might threaten her, might try to scare her away from Ace, but she wouldn't run. She couldn't. Not when he was finally finding his way back to himself, back to his son. She would protect her family, all of them, no matter what it took. The morning sun streamed through the diner's windows as Maggie wiped down the counter for the 3rd time. Her movements were mechanical, her mind elsewhere. The bell above the door chimed, and she looked up to see Sheriff Tom Wilson walking in, his weathered face creased with concern. "Morning, Maggie," he said, settling onto a stool at the counter. "Coffee black." Maggie poured him a cup, noticing how he watched her hands shake slightly. "What brings you by, Sheriff?" He took a slow sip before answering. "Heard about what happened at your place yesterday. The Angel showing up like that." He set the cup down carefully. "You know, most folks would have packed up and left town by now." "I'm not most folks," Maggie replied, straightening her apron. "No, you sure aren't." The sheriff's eyes crinkled at the corners. "Listen, Maggie, I need you to understand something. These guys, they're not going to just give up and ride away. Things could get a lot worse before they get better. Maggie's hands stilled on the counter. Are you telling me to leave town too? Actually, he leaned forward, lowering his voice. I'm telling you that what you're doing, standing by Ace, helping him turn his life around, it takes real courage. Not many people would do that. Surprised, Maggie studied his face. You don't think I'm being foolish? Foolish, he chuckled softly. Maybe a little, but sometimes the right thing and the smart thing aren't the same. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a business card. This is my personal number. Day or night you call if you need anything. Thank you, Maggie whispered, touched by the unexpected support. He hesitated. Be careful. And tell Ace. Tell him I've got my eye on things. He's not alone in this. After the sheriff left, Maggie's shift seemed to drag on endlessly. When she finally locked up for the night, she found Ace waiting outside, leaning against his truck. You okay? He asked, his voice gentle. Maggie nodded, but tears suddenly welled up in her eyes. The stress of the past few days caught up with her all at once. Ace stepped closer, his presence solid and reassuring. I've been thinking, he said quietly. Maybe it would be better if I left town for a while. Give things time to cool down. No, Maggie said firmly, wiping her eyes. That's exactly what they want. Maggie, you don't understand. These guys, they won't stop. They'll keep coming after what's important to me. His voice cracked slightly. And right now, that's you and Ethan. She looked up at him, really looked at him. The streetlight cast shadows across his face, but she could see the pain in his eyes, the weight of responsibility on his shoulders. I understand perfectly, she said, but running away isn't the answer. We face this together. Together? He shook his head. I can't ask you to... You're not asking. I'm telling. Maggie stepped closer, placing her hand on his arm. You're trying to change, trying to be better for your son. Don't let them take that away from you. The tension in Ace's shoulders eased slightly. He covered her hand with his own, rough fingers gentle against her skin. They stood there in silence, the night wrapping around them like a blanket, sharing strength in the quiet moment. Together then, he finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. Ace's hands trembled as he dialed Sheriff Wilson's number. The weight of what he was about to do pressed heavily on his chest. He sat in his truck, parked behind the abandoned gas station on the edge of town, where no one would spot him. Sheriff Wilson speaking. It's Ace. He took a deep breath. I'm ready to talk about the Angels. Everything I know. There was a pause on the other end. You sure about this? No going back once you start. I'm sure. Ace glanced at his rear-view mirror, checking for any signs of being followed. I've got dates, names, locations. Their whole operation. Meet me at the station in 20 minutes. Use the back entrance. Inside the sheriff's office, Ace spent hours detailing years of criminal activities. His voice grew hoarse as he described drug operations, weapon deals, and protection rackets. Each confession felt like removing a heavy stone from his shoulders. They're planning something big next week, Ace explained, pointing to a map spread across the desk. Moving a shipment through town. Everyone will be there. Sheriff Wilson leaned forward, his face serious. You understand what you're risking here? They find out you talked. I understand. Ace thought of Maggie, of his son Zach. But I can't live like this anymore. Always looking over my shoulder, worried about who they might hurt next. The sheriff nodded slowly. We'll need you to wear a wire. Get final confirmation on the details. Fear gripped Ace's stomach, but he nodded. Whatever it takes. The next few days were the hardest of Ace's life. He had to act normal around his former brothers, pretending nothing had changed. Every conversation was recorded, every meeting documented. The wire felt like it was burning against his skin, a constant reminder of his betrayal. One afternoon, he met with Snake, the gang's leader, at their usual spot behind the old factory. "You've been distant lately," Snake said, lighting a cigarette. "Some of the boys are wondering where your head's at." Ace forced himself to maintain eye contact. "Just been dealing with some personal stuff. Nothing that affects the club." "Better not be." Snake's eyes narrowed. "Remember your oath, brother. Blood in, blood out." Those words, once sacred to Ace, now felt like poison. He thought about all the years he'd lived by their code, the damage he'd helped cause. Never again. The day of the raid, Ace sat in the sheriff's office, listening to the radio chatter. SWAT teams moved into position around the gang's compound. His heart pounded as he heard the first shouts of, "Police! Hands up!" Through the chaos of arrests and confiscated evidence, word spread quickly through town. The Hells Angels' grip on the community was finally broken. At the diner, customers whispered about Ace's role in bringing them down. Mrs. Peterson, a regular who'd once crossed the street to avoid him, stopped him outside the diner. "What you did," she said, patting his arm. "That took real courage." Even some of his old neighbors, who'd kept their distance for years, began nodding hello. The suspicious stares gradually turned to looks of respect. It wasn't forgiveness exactly, but it was a start. Standing in front of the sheriff's station later that day, Ace felt lighter than he had in years. The Angels' colors no longer weighed him down. For the first time in as long as he could remember, he could look at his reflection and see not a criminal, but a man trying to make things right. "You did good," Sheriff Wilson said, joining him outside. "The DA's office is pleased. Your testimony will keep them locked up for a long time." The morning sun streamed through bare windows as Ace carried the last box into his new apartment. It wasn't much, just a one-bedroom unit above the hardware store on Main Street. But it was his, earned with honest money he'd saved from odd jobs. More importantly, it represented freedom from his dark past. Maggie stood in the doorway, holding a box marked "Kitchen" in her neat handwriting. "Where do you want this one?" "Just set it on the counter," Ace said, wiping sweat from his forehead. The apartment was small but clean, with fresh paint on the walls and newly refinished hardwood floors. The landlord, Mr. Peterson, had taken a chance on him after hearing about his role in bringing down the Angels. Maggie started unpacking dishes, arranging them carefully in the cupboards. "Have you thought more about Jim's offer at the auto shop?" Ace nodded, breaking down an empty box. "Going to talk to him tomorrow. Never thought anyone would want to hire me, but—" He shrugged, still getting used to people's changing attitudes toward him. "You're one of the best mechanics in town," Maggie said, reaching up to place a coffee mug on the top shelf. "Jim would be lucky to have you." As they worked together, organizing his modest belongings, Ace couldn't help but marvel at how different his life had become. The leather jacket with his Angels patches was gone, replaced by plain work shirts. His old burner phones were destroyed, and he had a regular cell phone now, with Maggie and Zach's numbers programmed in. A knock at the door made them both turn. Zach stood in the doorway, hands in his pockets, looking uncertain but less angry than before. "Hey, Dad," he said quietly. "Thought I'd stop by. See the new place." Ace's heart jumped, but he kept his voice steady. "Come on in, son. We're just getting everything sorted." Maggie smiled warmly at Zach. "I'll give you two some space. I need to pick up Ethan from soccer practice anyway." She touched Ace's arm gently as she passed, a gesture of support that meant more than words could say. After she left, Zach walked around the small apartment, taking it all in. His eyes lingered on a framed photo Ace had just hung, the two of them at a baseball game years ago, before everything fell apart. "Remember that day?" Ace asked softly. "Yeah," Zach replied. "Cardinals versus Cubs. You bought me my first hot dog." He paused, then added, "I still root for the Cardinals." "Listen," Zach continued, turning to face his father. "I've been thinking, maybe we could do that again sometime. Watch a game together, I mean." Ace's throat tightened. "I'd like that. There's a sports bar downtown that shows all the games." "Maybe next Tuesday?" Zach suggested. "They're playing the Brewers." "Tuesday works," Ace said, trying to keep his voice steady despite the joy threatening to overwhelm him. "I can meet you there after work, if I get the job at Jim's." Zach nodded, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Good luck with that. You always were good with engines." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, surrounded by moving boxes and the promise of new beginnings. It wasn't perfect, and they both knew there was still a long road ahead, but it was a start. "Same time as the old days?" Ace asked. "First pitch is usually at 7. "Yeah," Zach replied. "I'll be there." Maggie wiped down the last table at Jerry's diner, her mind wandering to the conversation she'd had earlier that day. Sarah Chen, the owner of The Sweet Spot, a popular bakery and cafe in town, had stopped by during the morning rush. What Sarah had said still echoed in her thoughts. "I need someone with your experience, Maggie," Sarah had told her. "Someone who knows how to run things, handle people, and keep everything organized. The business is growing, and I can't do it alone anymore." The offer was unexpected. Assistant manager at The Sweet Spot, with better pay, regular hours, and even health benefits. It seemed almost too good to be true. The bell above the diner's door chimed, and Ace walked in, his work shirt from Jim's auto shop carrying traces of engine grease. He'd been working there for 2 weeks now, proving himself with every repair job. "You look lost in thought," he said, settling onto a stool at the counter. Maggie poured him a cup of coffee without asking. "Sarah Chen made me a job offer today." "The bakery lady?" Ace wrapped his hands around the warm mug. "What kind of offer?" "Assistant manager position. Better pay, better hours." Maggie trailed off, arranging sugar packets in their container. "So what's holding you back?" Maggie sighed, leaning against the counter. "I've been here at Jerry's for 6 years. I know this place inside and out. The customers, the routine, it's comfortable." "Comfortable isn't always good," Ace said quietly. "Sometimes it's just another word for stuck." Maggie looked up, meeting his steady gaze. "What if I'm not cut out for it? Running a growing business is different from waiting tables." "You kidding me?" Ace set down his coffee. "I've seen you handle 3 tables of rowdy teenagers, calm down angry customers, and sort out kitchen disasters, all while making sure Ethan gets to soccer practice on time. You're more capable than you give yourself credit for." "But—" "No buts," Ace interrupted. "You've been supporting everyone else for so long, maybe it's time to do something for yourself." Maggie thought about Ethan, how his eyes lit up whenever they passed by the Sweet Spot's window displays. Having regular hours would mean more time with him, being there for his school events without having to beg for schedule changes. "Sarah said she'd train me," Maggie admitted. "She wants someone who can help expand the business, maybe even open a second location eventually." "Sounds like she sees what I see. Someone smart, capable, and ready for more." Maggie pulled out her phone, where Sarah's number was still displayed from their earlier conversation. Her finger hovered over the call button. "You really think I can do this?" Ace reached across the counter and squeezed her hand. "I know you can. The question is, are you ready to believe it too?" Taking a deep breath, Maggie pressed the call button. Sarah answered on the second ring. "Sarah, it's Maggie Reynolds, about that position. I'd like to accept if the offer's still open." Sarah's enthusiastic response brought a smile to Maggie's face. As she hung up, she felt lighter somehow, as if a weight she hadn't known she was carrying had lifted. "I did it," she whispered, then louder. "I actually did it." Ace's proud smile mirrored her own. "You sure did, and you're going to be amazing at it." Looking at him, this man who had fought his own battles and come out stronger, Maggie felt a surge of confidence. If he could rebuild his life from the ground up, she could certainly take this step toward building a better future for herself and Ethan. The aroma of lasagna filled Maggie's small apartment kitchen. She'd spent the afternoon preparing Ethan's favorite meal, layering pasta, sauce, and cheese with care. The table was set for 3, a sight that would have seemed strange just months ago, but now felt perfectly natural. Ace carried the steaming dish to the table, while Ethan arranged the garlic bread in a basket. The boy had stopped tensing up when Ace was around, his shoulders relaxed, his movements easy and natural. "This smells amazing," Ace said, settling into his chair. His work shirt was clean now, changed after his shift at Jim's auto shop. "Mom makes the best lasagna," Ethan declared, his eyes bright with anticipation. "She puts extra cheese in the middle layer." Maggie smiled, watching her son chat comfortably with Ace. It was such a change from the wary glances and careful distance Ethan had maintained in the beginning. "Did you tell Ace about your science project?" Maggie asked, passing the salad bowl. Ethan perked up. "Oh yeah, we're building a model of the solar system. I got Jupiter." He turned to Ace. "Would you maybe help me paint it? Mom's not very good with that stuff." "Hey," Maggie protested with a laugh. "Well, you're not," Ethan said matter-of-factly. "Remember my volcano? It was kind of lumpy." Ace chuckled, a warm sound that filled the kitchen. "I'd love to help. We could use some of that special paint I got from the shop. It'll make Jupiter's stripes look really cool." Ethan's face lit up. "Really? That would be awesome." They settled into eating, the conversation flowing easily between them. Maggie noticed how Ace would listen intently whenever Ethan spoke, giving the boy his full attention. It was these small gestures that had gradually won both their trust. "Mom's starting her new job next week," Ethan announced, reaching for more garlic bread. "The sweet spot," Ace nodded. "You excited about that, Maggie?" "Nervous," she admitted. "But yes, excited too. Sarah's already talking about teaching me her special recipes." "And she's going to be home for dinner every night," Ethan added. "No more late shifts." "That's right," Maggie reached over to ruffle her son's hair. "No more missing your soccer games either." "Speaking of soccer," Ace said, "I was thinking maybe we could practice some moves this weekend, if that's okay with your mom?" Ethan looked hopefully at Maggie. She nodded, touched by how naturally they'd fallen into this rhythm of checking with her, respecting her role as Ethan's mother while building their own bond. "Cool," Ethan exclaimed. "Can you show me that trick you were talking about? The one with the back kick?" "Sure thing, buddy." The word buddy rolled off Ace's tongue naturally now, no longer awkward or forced. Maggie watched them discuss soccer techniques, her heart full. The fear and uncertainty that had marked their early days seemed like a distant memory. After dinner, Ethan helped clear the table before heading to his room to start on homework. He paused at the doorway, turning back to look at them both. "Thanks for dinner, Mom," he said, then added with a small smile, "Thanks for being here, Ace." The simple words carried weight, an acceptance that brought moisture to Maggie's eyes. When Ethan disappeared down the hallway, she felt Ace's hand cover hers on the kitchen counter. "You okay?" he asked softly. "More than okay," she whispered, looking around her kitchen. Their kitchen now, really. The space felt different, warmer somehow, like a real home. The late afternoon sun painted golden streaks across the park's winding paths. Maggie and Ace walked hand in hand, their steps matching in an easy rhythm. The spring air carried the scent of blooming flowers and fresh-cut grass, a perfect day for a family outing. Ahead of them, Ethan darted between trees, his sneakers flashing as he chased after a soccer ball. His laughter echoed across the park, pure and uninhibited. It was a sound that made Maggie's heart swell every time she heard it. "Careful near the pond," Maggie called out, watching as Ethan skillfully maneuvered his ball away from the water's edge. "I got it, Mom," he shouted back, his confidence making both adults smile. Ace's hand squeezed hers gently. His palm was warm and calloused from work at the auto shop, but his touch was tender. The tattoos on his arms, once intimidating, had become as familiar to Maggie as her own skin. They told the story of his past, but they weren't who he was anymore. "He's gotten really good with that ball," Ace observed, pride evident in his voice. "Those weekend practices are paying off." "They sure are," Maggie agreed, watching as Ethan attempted a trick move Ace had taught him. "I never thought I'd see him this happy about sports. Before, he'd just sit inside reading comics all day." A couple walking their dog passed by, nodding hello. There was no tension in their greeting, no whispered comments or wary glances. The town had gradually accepted Ace, seeing him through new eyes, not as the former gang member, but as the man who fixed their cars, helped their kids with soccer practice, and loved Maggie and Ethan with quiet devotion. They reached the park bench where they often sat to watch the sunset. Ethan was still within sight, now practicing his kicks against a tree trunk. "Remember the first time we came here?" Maggie asked, settling onto the worn wooden seat. "You were still using that cane from the hospital. And you wouldn't let me walk more than 10 feet without making me rest," Ace chuckled, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "You were quite the drill sergeant about my recovery." "Someone had to be," she teased. "You were terrible at following doctor's orders." The memory of those early days felt distant now. The fear, the uncertainty, the threats that had loomed over them. They'd weathered it all together, emerging stronger on the other side. Ethan jogged over, slightly out of breath but grinning. "Did you see that kick? Just like you showed me, Ace." "Perfect form, buddy," Ace praised. "Keep that up, and you'll be scoring goals left and right in your next game." "Can we get ice cream?" Ethan asked, wiping his forehead with his sleeve. "Please?" "After dinner," Maggie promised. "We should head back soon anyway. It's getting late." They started walking toward home, Ethan once again ranging ahead with his ball. The setting sun cast long shadows across the path, and a cool breeze rustled through the trees. Ace's arm slipped around Maggie's waist, pulling her close as they walked. Looking at her profile in the golden light, Ace felt a surge of gratitude so strong it almost took his breath away. This woman had seen past his rough exterior, had believed in him when no one else would. She'd given him a chance at a real family, at redemption. "I owe you everything," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. Maggie turned to him with a smile, her eyes soft with understanding and love. In that moment, she knew with absolute certainty that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, stronger for having found each other. I hope you like this story. Please share what's your favorite part of the story, and where in the world you are watching from. Have a wonderful day.